On the day I was pushed into the operating room, my family and my boyfriend were all by my foster sister's side, watching her competition. That day, something went wrong with my surgery. The tumor in my brain was removed, but my nerves were damaged. From then on, I no longer had normal human emotions. Chapter 1. There was a tumor growing in my brain. I originally wanted to tell my parents and my boyfriend about it, but my parents were busy buying plane tickets to accompany my foster sister overseas for a dance competition. My boyfriend had also been working overtime constantly lately. My fingers hovered over the chat box for a long time. In the end, I chose to delete the message I had already typed out. I knew that anything about me, even if I said it out loud, no one would care. After all, in everyone's eyes, my existence wasn't even 1/10,000th as important as my foster sister's. Chapter 2. My foster sister, Carly, was the daughter of my father's comrade. When she was 6 years old, a car accident took both her parents' lives. She was rejected and driven away by her relatives. In the end, she wandered the streets, dirty and alone, until my father, who had come to pay respects to his old friend, found her. From that moment on, she became the second daughter in our family. That year, I was 10, and Carly was 6. My parents told me, "Wendy, you're already a big girl now. You need to learn how to take care of your younger sister." I didn't know how to take care of a younger sister. All I knew was that Carly always seemed so weak and fragile. She didn't need to do anything, just stand there, looking at me with tearful, reddened eyes, and everything I had would become hers. When I was 10, I lost my bedroom and moved into the guest room. At 12, my piano lessons were canceled, and the piano at home was sold. The piano room became Carly's dance studio. After I turned 15, I never wore new clothes again. I only rotated between 2 school uniforms. My parents didn't care. They dressed Carly up beautifully and proudly told everyone how pretty their daughter was. From that time on, I stopped going home very often. The year I was about to graduate from university, Carly went to study in another city. My parents briefly remembered me again. They would call me from time to time, asking about my life. Occasionally, they even sent me job listings in my city. Supporting the orphan of his comrade through college became the greatest achievement of my father's life. He seemed refreshed and fulfilled. He said he wanted to visit my city to see me, and while he was at it, he would also evaluate whether the boyfriend I had been dating for 3 years was reliable. By then, I no longer had any expectations for them. Still, I booked a hotel and restaurant to receive them. What I didn't expect was that Carly, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, would come along with them. That day, her smile was especially pure. Just like when she had first arrived at my home, she smiled like that at my boyfriend the entire evening. Later, I saw Carly's profile picture pinned at the top of my boyfriend's chat list. Chapter 3. Before being pushed into the operating room, I couldn't hold back anymore and called my parents. The call lasted only 3 seconds. From the other end came their hurried voices. "Wendy, we're about to board. Your sister's competition is more important. Whatever it is, wait until we come back." I didn't even get the chance to say a single word before the call was cut off. I froze, staring at my phone screen. Just then, a new post from my boyfriend, Mason, popped up. He said he was heading off to chase his dreams. With a photo of a plane ticket, the destination printed on it was the country where Carly's competition would be held. I stared at the screen blankly, until my aunt, who stood beside me, couldn't bear to watch anymore and forcibly took my phone away. "I've already signed the consent form for you," she said gently, stroking my head. Then she let out a long sigh. "Your father has been foolish all these years, it's just that you've suffered for it. Go on, child, I'll be waiting outside for you." I was pushed into the operating room, and the anesthesia slowly began to take effect. Before losing consciousness, I couldn't help but think, if I were to die in this surgery, would my parents shed even a single tear for me? And Mason, I thought, once I get out, I'll tell him face to face. I've known for a long time that his heart has changed. This time, I'm choosing to let him go. Chapter 4. My story with Mason wasn't particularly dramatic. But back in our university days, it was a relationship that both teachers and classmates admired. The beginning of it was rather cliché. The student council president, handsome, from a great family, once reached out to help a logistics girl during a freshman event when she collapsed from hypoglycemia after working all day without eating. The second time we met, he deliberately kept 2 candies in his pocket for her. From then on, keeping candy in his pocket for me became Mason's habit. In his eyes, I was someone who could be knocked over by a gust of wind. He would always look at me worriedly and say, "Wendy, I've never been this afraid of losing someone before." He said I meant something different to him than anyone else. There would always be a place just for me by his side, just like how his coat pocket would always have candy prepared for me. But the last time, after pulling 2 all-night meetings in a row, when I reached into Mason's coat pocket again, what I found was a strange lipstick. Chanel Silver Tube No. 116, Carly's favorite shade. Without changing my expression, I put the lipstick back into his pocket. From then on, I learned to carry my own candy. Chapter 5. My life became completely different starting at the age of 10. From that moment on, I tried to get used to living without relying on anyone. I lowered my expectations of everyone. As long as I expected nothing, I wouldn't be disappointed, and I wouldn't fall into despair when disappointment piled up. But I was still human. I could never be as detached as I imagined. Mason spent a year pursuing me, and the 3 years after that treating me with the utmost care. For full years in total, little by little, he moved me. Little by little, he made me believe that I was someone who could rely on another person. But stories are always painfully cliché. Just when I thought I had found someone who could love me sincerely, he changed. He fell for my foster sister. At first, it was just pity for her childhood circumstances. Then it was her lively, spirited personality, every detail drawing his attention. Later, as he listened to Carly talk about her love for dance, word by word, and watched her shine on stage, he finally realized his true feelings. Mason said he had never met someone so special, so sincere, like a blazing flame. Because of her, he realized for the first time that love was meant to burn passionately. What he felt for me was more like familial attachment and habit. Those were the words Mason confessed after getting drunk. After that, he began making careful plans to pursue Carly and to leave me. Of course, I was preparing for the same thing. I would exit their world as gracefully as possible. This was something I had done often in my first 20 years of life, getting used to being overlooked and quietly stepping away without a word. But all of those thoughts changed the moment I opened my eyes after the surgery. I realized the one who should leave shouldn't be me. Chapter 6. The first person to notice my change was my aunt. She sat by my hospital bed, taking care of me, peeling an apple while telling little stories to comfort me. Then she realized I didn't need comforting. In her eyes, I had always been quiet, reserved, rarely expressing my needs. But she could always tell from my eyes that deep down, I still longed for my parents' care, for the complete family love that should have been mine. But now, that longing was gone. After the surgery, I had become almost unnaturally indifferent. So on the 5th day, she cautiously asked if I wanted to call my parents. I refused. In the past, even if my parents didn't care about me, I would still report my situation to them after anything important happened. But this time, I had no intention of contacting them at all. The worry in my aunt's eyes deepened. After a long while, she let out a sigh, muttering to herself. She said, "If your father keeps going like this, sooner or later, he'll regret it." Another half-month passed, and with my aunt's company, I recovered and was discharged from the hospital. During this time, the doctors examined my condition. When they asked if I felt anything unusual, I calmly told them, I've never felt better. All those chaotic emotions that used to disrupt my mind, the ones that made it impossible for me to think clearly, had completely disappeared. Now, I could see many things clearly, calmly, rationally. For example, my parents truly didn't care about me, so when they passed away, their inheritance might not include me at all, but the responsibility of supporting them could very well fall on me. And the company that Mason and I built together, since I was always the one handling everything, then the company only needed me. I would no longer beg them for affection. As for the benefits that should belong to me, not a single bit would I give up. Chapter 7. On the day my aunt accompanied me home, we happened to run into my parents and my foster sister returning together as one happy family. My foster sister had won a major prize in her competition. And to celebrate, they had stayed overseas for another half-month. Their social media feeds were flooded with travel photos. Yet no one had bothered to ask why I had called that day. The cheerful group walked in, only to see me standing in the living room, my face pale. All 4 of them showed a hint of awkwardness at the same time. Yes, 4 people. Mason was there too. Wendy. I won a big prize this time. I invited Mason over to celebrate at home. You don't mind, right? Carly was the first to react. She quickly walked up to me and affectionately linked her arm with mine. Mason also snapped out of it. He looked like he wanted to say something, but when his eyes met mine, he ultimately didn't say those lies in front of me. My parents looked uneasy as well. They didn't say anything, only casting expectant looks at me, as if hoping I would be sensible and let everything slide. If it were the old me, I would have done exactly that. After all, I had always been the least troublesome child in their eyes. But now, under their gaze, I slowly removed Carly's hand from my arm. Sister! Carly's eyes reddened instantly, as if tears were about to fall. Wendy, you're already an adult. What's the point of picking on your younger sister? Why are you being so unreasonable? My father immediately found his angle of attack and began scolding me loudly. Mason couldn't help but speak up to defend Carly as well. My mother, however, said nothing. She simply let them berate me in silence, until my aunt, who had been upstairs packing my things, came down. She took my hand and started leading me out. Only then did my father and Mason fall silent. Stop! Where are you going? This time, it was my mother who spoke, the woman who loved to boast outside about how obedient I was, only to turn around and give all the good things to Carly. To my house. She needs peace and recovery. If she stays with you, who knows when you'll bully her to death. My aunt turned back, her eyes red, glaring at them fiercely. My mother choked on her words and didn't argue with my aunt. Instead, she turned her attention to me. Wendy, you are part of this family. Are you really going to leave with your aunt? If word gets out, how would that look? When she said this, she frowned slightly, her tone full of disapproval and faint blame, as if my decision had caused her great trouble. She had always been like this, knowing exactly how to use a soft tone to make me feel guilty. But now, I could no longer feel that pull on my heart, so I simply told her the truth. Yes, my aunt signed my surgery consent form. From now on, she's the only family I acknowledge. What kind of nonsense are you saying? My father exploded almost instantly, striding toward me as if to hit me, only to be stopped by Mason, taking advantage of the moment. My aunt quickly pulled me away. Behind us, my mother's voice continued to call out insistently. Surgery? What surgery? Why didn't you tell me? Even after my aunt and I got into the car, she kept knocking on the window relentlessly. Seeing this, my aunt rolled down the window and kindly explained, "Do you know what a brain tumor removal surgery is? A few days ago, your daughter had a tumor in her brain. She couldn't find a family member to sign the consent form, and her treatment was almost delayed. In the end, she came to me for help. That's the only reason it didn't worsen." By the time she finished speaking, my mother's face had gone completely pale. "For something this serious, why didn't she tell us?" she muttered. My aunt smiled and reminded her. "Half a month ago, Wendy called you many times." As if remembering something, my mother frantically took out her phone, searching through it in disbelief. "Even if you find the call records, it's useless," my aunt said calmly. "You did answer, but who actually listened to her? You were all too busy accompanying your foster daughter on her flight." After saying that, my aunt ignored her completely, stepped on the accelerator, and drove off with me. Chapter 8. That very night, my mom tried to contact me, only to realize that all her accounts had been blocked by me. Along with her, my dad, Carly, and Mason had all been blocked as well. Unable to reach me, and having just been humiliated, they couldn't bring themselves to go to my aunt and uncle either. So instead, they went around complaining about me within the extended family, bad-mouthing me to anyone who would listen, calling me petty and unfilial. They said I was jealous of my sister for being outstanding and winning awards, that I fell ill without even telling the family, and that I had embarrassed them by letting my situation reach my aunt. When my aunt first saw what they were saying, she was so furious she actually laughed. She told me not to look at the group messages. Then she turned around and sent out my medical records from back then, along with photos from the past few days of her staying at the hospital to take care of me. She also directly tagged my parents in the family group chat by name. My aunt questioned how their conscience could have become so rotten, how their own daughter had been critically ill in the hospital, nearly losing her life multiple times because of their delays that prevented her from getting surgery in time. Yet up until now, they hadn't shown a single word of concern, and worse, they could even downplay something as serious as a malignant tumor in her brain as if it were nothing, then turn around and smear their own daughter who was still in recovery. With their lies exposed, my parents flew into a rage out of humiliation, sending long strings of voice messages back and forth to argue with my aunt in the group chat. But my aunt ignored them completely and simply left the group. That night, she held me as we slept, her warm hand gently patting my shoulder. She said, "Good child. What your parents did was wrong. I know you did nothing wrong. If you feel upset, just cry it out. Don't keep it bottled up and hurt yourself." Hearing this, I simply looked at her calmly. I told her I wasn't sad at all. In fact, from beginning to end, not a single ripple had stirred in my heart. When I thought about my parents again, I no longer cared whether they were concerned about me or not. What occupied my mind instead was how to sever ties with them. That way, I wouldn't remain entangled with them in this unclear, messy way, only to be dragged down by them in the future and end up with a life in complete disarray. Under the moonlight, I saw the shock in my aunt's eyes. Those usually gentle eyes widened, and after a moment, they were filled with heartbreak. I knew something was wrong with me. I could clearly perceive other people's emotions, but I couldn't feel any emotions of my own anymore. Perhaps this was a side effect of the surgery, but I didn't hate this state. In fact, I even thought it was better this way. I still retained my ability to distinguish right from wrong. I just viewed things in a more objective and rational manner. For example, right now, I knew clearly that my aunt was someone who genuinely cared about me. Even if I couldn't feel what was called gratitude, I still knew that in the days to come, I should do my best to treat her well and repay her kindness. As for my parents, they might have noticed the change in me, yet they were still clinging to the illusion that I would eventually go back, lower my head, and let them control me again. But what they didn't know was that this would never happen again. Chapter 9. Another half-month passed. Every day, my parents flaunted on WeChat moments how wonderfully they treated Carly, even going out of their way to have others relay those posts to me. They wanted me to regret it. They wanted me to understand that if I were perceptive enough, if I knew how to lower myself and give in to them, to please and obey them like Carly, then they could treat me just as well. Even though, for the past 20-something years, I had in fact lived exactly the way they expected me to. Finally, seeing that I remained completely unmoved, they panicked. One day, at the entrance of my company, I saw my parents and Carly, the three of them standing together. Beside them was Mason, who had also been missing for half a month. When Mason saw me, he instinctively opened his mouth as if to greet me. But in the end, no words came out. He simply turned his head away guiltily. Carly, standing next to him, immediately darkened at the sight. Unlike the radiant little princess my parents showed off on WeChat, Carly now looked haggard, her eyes red and swollen as if she had just been crying. Yet the moment she saw me, her eyes lit up. They had clearly come with bad intentions, but I had no interest in watching their performance. Just as I was about to walk past them and head inside, my mom grabbed my wrist. She said, "Wendy, Carly has fallen into severe depression out of guilt toward you. The doctor says she needs her partner's companionship. We've already asked Mason, and you'll definitely give in to your sister, right?" When I didn't respond, she added, "Carly has already made a name for herself in the domestic dance world. The family has invested so much money over the years to build her up. As her sister, you can't just stand by and watch her career be ruined." Her sharp voice made my head ache. I quietly pulled my hand back and looked at the four people in front of me, each harboring their own schemes. Now that the filter of so-called family affection had been stripped away, I could see their intentions clearly. Even if Mason wanted to be with Carly, there were many proper and dignified ways to negotiate it, instead of making such a public scene at the company entrance to force me into submission. At the end of the day, They were simply testing my bottom line, trying to see whether I was still as obedient as before, willing to sacrifice my own interests without limit just to satisfy them. Fine, I said after a moment of thought. But before the people in front of me could show relieved smiles, I turned to Mason and added, 3 years of university plus 3 years of building the business, that's 6 years. I want 15% of the company's original shares as compensation. As if he hadn't expected me to ask for compensation, Mason's expression turned unpleasant. Just as he was about to speak, I raised the stakes again. Once the compensation is settled, I won't say a word about you and Carly, even if you get married in the future. You don't need to invite me. I won't return home. As long as you don't come bothering me, I'll disappear completely from your lives. You wouldn't want your dance goddess to be labeled as a homewrecker, would you? The moment my words fell, Carly reacted almost instantly. Without giving Mason time to think, she clung to his arm and burst into tears, looking pitiful and wronged. Mason had always prided himself on being aloof, treating money like dirt, and now, at an age where he was blinded by love, he actually agreed in the end. The company had been founded by Mason and me together. I held 26% of the shares, while he held 35%. Over the years, I had gradually bought back 10% more. If Mason transferred his shares to me now, I would become the largest shareholder in the company, and Mason would inevitably be sidelined. To prevent him from coming to his senses and going back on his word, I immediately took out my phone, had my secretary prepare the documents, and called in a notary. The moment the shares were in my hands, I sincerely wished Carly and Mason a lifetime of happiness together. I even personally escorted them to the company entrance, with the smug satisfaction of a victor on her face. Carly looked at me and said, "Sister, you've already taken the money. From now on, you can't cling to Brother Mason anymore, okay?" I smiled and called over the security guard nearby, just about to have them escorted out, when my mom stepped out from behind her and stared at me fixedly. She asked, "What do you mean by saying you'll never come home again?" Chapter 10. Seeing that I had no intention of responding, she clutched her chest again and began accusing me. "You unfilial daughter, are you trying to anger me to death?" As she spoke, she once again put on that familiar act, pretending to be so upset by me that she was physically unwell. But I would no longer feel guilty or given because of her fake illness like I used to. I didn't even spare her a glance. I turned and was about to leave. Finally, the smug satisfaction in my mother's eyes disappeared. "Child, what's wrong with you?" She grabbed the corner of my clothes, her face full of panic. Even her voice trembled as she spoke. She had realized it, her feigned weakness, her tactic of retreating to gain control. All those methods she once used to manipulate me no longer worked. Because I no longer cared about her, I would not compromise or give in for her anymore. "Ma'am," I said softly, looking at her and the family standing behind her, speaking slowly, "from now on, you all should live your lives well." "What nonsense are you talking about?" My father, who had stayed silent until now and let my mother play the good cop, suddenly snapped. He strode forward and raised his hand as if to hit me. Mason tried to stop him, but Carly yanked him back harshly. Amid the chaos, a team of bodyguards I had called in beforehand stepped forward and stood firmly in front of me. This time, it was my father who was stunned. He clutched his chest as if about to faint from anger, the exact same act my mother had just performed. At this point, Mason finally broke free from Carly's grip and walked up to me. There was disapproval in his eyes as he looked at me. "Wendy, you can hate me, but uncle and aunt are still your biological parents. What you're doing is too much." Sure, I replied casually, not wanting to waste another word. I lowered my head and started handling documents on my phone. Mason choked on my indifferent attitude. Just as he was about to say something else, I lifted my head and looked at him seriously. "Mason, there's nothing left for us to talk about. Leaving the money is enough. As for you, I really don't want any further contact." When he met the cold calmness on my face, a trace of panic and helplessness finally appeared in his expression. "Also, due to your unannounced absence for half a month, we can no longer maintain trust in you. The company has officially decided to remove you from your position as CEO. I hope you can behave with some dignity, don't cling on, and it would be best if you disappeared entirely." After saying that, I waved my phone at him and, right in front of him, blocked him on the company's messaging platform as well. Ignoring his ugly expression, I turned and left with ease. As expected, I took over Mason's former position. Then, working together with the other shareholders to apply pressure, Mason was eventually forced to sell off the remaining shares he held. It seems that men really can hinder one's career. After driving Mason out, the company began to flourish. As for Mason, while I was earning more than enough, he was still immersed in his self-proclaimed role as a hopeless romantic, focusing on dating his former fiancée's younger sister. Even at this point, they still believed they were the winners. Carly became extremely high-profile, constantly posting on social media with Mason and my parents, showing off their perfect family and romantic life. Of course, all the expenses were paid by Mason. After my parents retired, their life had already become strained. Over the years, all their savings had been poured into supporting Carly's dance career. Previously, they relied on me to maintain the illusion of a glamorous life. Now, the whole family had neatly turned to draining Mason instead. The relatives they interacted with daily didn't know the truth and kept flattering them, saying they had found a perfect, wealthy son-in-law, just as they were all happily acting as messengers, loudly spreading how blissful their family of four was. I bought my aunt a new house. I took her out of the old neighborhood we used to live in and moved her into a standalone house in the city center. Chapter 11. My aunt had never married in her life, nor had she ever had children, but she had always treated me like her own daughter. At first, she absolutely refused to let me put her name on the property deed. It wasn't until I told her that only by putting the house under her name could it be kept safe from those who might try to exploit it, that she finally agreed. Recalling how I used to act spoiled around her, I mimicked that same intimacy and leaned against her shoulder. I said, "From now on, I'll live with you. Auntie, you won't find me annoying, right?" Her eyes instantly reddened. She patted my back gently and comforted me in a soft voice. "Of course not. Of course not. As long as Auntie is here, Wendy will always have a home." The moment my parents heard that I had bought a house for my aunt, their eyes turned red with jealousy. That very night, they rushed to the residential complex where my aunt and I lived. But the security there was strict. Since they weren't registered, they weren't even allowed to stay at the gate for more than 3 minutes. My father called my aunt's phone and immediately launched into a barrage of insults. In his words, my aunt had become a scheming villain, deliberately sowing discord between him and his daughter. My aunt listened calmly, then asked in return, "Big brother, do the things you've done to Wendy really need me to stir anything up?" My father faltered, without giving him a chance to respond. My aunt continued, "You say Wendy is your daughter, but why is there no bedroom for her in your home? No wardrobe, no dishes or utensils for her, not even a photo of her in your family portraits. You keep saying she's your daughter, then where have you placed her in your life?" I watched as my aunt grew emotional while speaking into the phone. I walked over and wrapped my arms around her from behind. I remembered that winter, deep in the coldest days, when I had no winter clothes. I could only layer all my spring and autumn school uniforms, shivering in the wind and snow. But when I returned home, I found no one there. My parents had taken Carly out to watch a movie. There was no food left for me in the kitchen, and I had no money in my pocket. Before I fainted, I used my last bit of strength to make my way to the entrance of my aunt's residential complex. Her home was 5 long streets away from mine. It felt like the longest distance I had ever walked in my life. If I had collapsed anywhere along the way in that storm, I would never have reached that harbor again. Luckily, I made it. At the gate, I saw my aunt coming down with an umbrella to throw out the trash. I saw the shock and worry on her face as she rushed over and held me, my body already numb from the cold. From that moment on, I had a home again. My room was in my aunt's house. My dishes and utensils were there too. She had even bought back the piano that had once been sold, placing it quietly in the living room. I had long forgotten how to play, but that day, I made a silent vow in my heart, as long as I stayed here, I would become my aunt's greatest support in the future. So now, as my father on the other end of the phone was left speechless by my aunt's questioning and began spewing insults and long tirades, I calmly took the phone and spoke to him. "Don't even think about the new house. Say one more word, and you won't even get to keep your current one." If he hadn't mentioned it, I might have forgotten, not just the house, but all their living expenses had been paid from my card. Their meager retirement funds and savings had long been drained over the years, spent on flying Carly around the world for competitions and hiring famous dance instructors. And yet, even so, they had trampled me into the dirt, looking down on me in every possible way. There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone. Then my father's furious roar exploded through. "Wendy, you've really crossed the line. How dare you?" The louder he shouted, the more guilty he was. "I've already died once on the operating table. There's nothing left for me to be afraid of," I said calmly, stating my feelings. But my father took this as me blaming them. He switched tactics, trying once again to alternate between pressure and persuasion. Just like before. "In the end, you're still blaming us for caring too much about your sister. Why don't you think about it more, how pitiful your sister is? Seems like you really think your current house is too spacious," I said, and hung up. Then I immediately contacted a real estate agent. While I was preparing to sell the house, my parents refused to give up, to force me to show myself. They began following me and causing trouble wherever I appeared. I ignored them for 3 days, had people record everything to gather enough evidence, and then reported them to the police. Soon enough, they were detained for 15 days on charges of provoking trouble. My parents had always believed they lived their lives with dignity and status. They never expected that in their later years, they would be sent to the police station by their own daughter. Right in front of the police, they cursed at me loudly, berating my unfilial behavior. I found it too noisy, so I put in earplugs. Turning around, I told the officer handling the mediation that I firmly refused any settlement. As they were being taken away, the father who had always seemed so authoritative in my memories looked at me with fear in his eyes. Realizing that I might truly stop caring about them entirely, he softened his tone. He called out Wendy again and again, an intimacy I had not dared to hope for since I was 10 years old. But I had long lost my emotions. So naturally, I would never soften toward him again. Chapter 12. Unfortunately, Carly managed to get away. When my parents were taken into custody, she ran off overnight with Mason on a trip out of town, to protect the reputation of the rising dance star they had personally groomed. My parents insisted that everything had been their own doing, claiming that Carly had absolutely nothing to do with it. Thinking of Carly's scheming nature, the kind that couldn't feel at ease unless she was causing trouble, I figured there would be another opportunity sooner or later. So, during this time, I sold the old house at a low price to a heavily tattooed man who had connections in both legal and underground circles. And just like that, before my parents were even released, Carly returned from her trip and found herself unable to enter what used to be her home. I heard that she refused to believe the house was gone and kept banging on the door for a long time, demanding an explanation. But when the door finally opened and she saw the man, nearly 9 meters tall, she was so frightened that she didn't dare say a word. In the end, Mason drove over and took her back to his place. A couple of days later, my parents were released as well. When they heard that the house had been sold, they erupted into furious curses again. But no one dared to come looking for trouble with me anymore. Survival had become their most pressing concern. So very quickly, my parents packed up their belongings and moved into Mason's house overnight. At first, Mason welcomed them, but my parents had grown used to putting on airs and acting superior around me all these years. Now that they had lost their usual target to dominate, they couldn't hold back for long before showing their true, unpleasant nature to Mason. Mason, who had never been mistreated in his life, soon clashed with them for the first time. Not long after, my parents moved out of his house. Mason rented them a separate apartment, half a city away from his own home. For this, my parents complained endlessly to Carly. They said that when Mason was with me, he had never been so disrespectful to them, and asked why Carly didn't speak up more in front of him. But Carly still relied on Mason to fund her dance career. There was no way she could afford to be assertive with him. Over time, in order to maintain her relationship with Mason, Carly gradually distanced herself from my parents as well. On an ordinary day, when Carly went to visit them, she overheard them complaining about Mason, and reminiscing about how smooth and comfortable their lives had been back when I was the one taking care of their daily needs. This was their usual tactic, elevating one person to belittle another. In the end, it was all for their own benefit. But Carly wasn't fooled. She had already had enough these past days. On the spot, She smashed everything in the house that could be smashed, then stood with her hands on her hips and demanded that if they thought I was so good, why didn't they go find me instead? It was the first time she had ever lost her temper in front of them. Now that she had secured Mason, her family had become nothing more than an accessory to her life. She no longer needed to cater to anyone. That time, the argument was nothing short of explosive. My mother was the main aggressor. She cried and wailed at the doorway of the rental apartment, grabbing Carly by the hair, one moment calling her an ungrateful ingrate who had betrayed all the years of care and investment, the next moment cursing me for being heartless, saying that things had always been this way and that it was just one missed surgery. What right did I have to make such a fuss? My father, feeling ashamed, stayed inside smoking in silence. Carly didn't back down either. She struggled against my mother, shouting back that she was a parasite, never satisfied, always draining others. In the end, the commotion drew the entire floor out to watch before it finally died down. The incident spread quickly. The relatives who used to flatter them gradually distanced themselves and stopped associating with them. One relative relayed my parents' current situation to me, sighing as he spoke. Back then, your parents loved hearing people praise them for raising children so well. They said Carly, someone else's child, was raised like a princess all thanks to their kindness. Who would have thought she'd turn out to be such an ungrateful ingrate? As he spoke, he glanced at me with a fawning smile. Wendy, if you ask me, your aunt really has good judgment, choosing you. Now she can just enjoy a peaceful life. But my aunt wasn't impressed at all. She bluntly showed him the door without any courtesy. Chapter 13. The moment the door closed, my aunt was still fuming. When you were little, he mocked you for being a wild child more than once. Now that his son has graduated and needs a job, he comes to flatter you. People like that, always sucking up to the powerful and stepping on the weak. Bah. I didn't feel much about it. I had encountered far too many people like that in the first half of my life. But under the warm yellow light, as I looked at the worry etched into my aunt's face, a faint warmth suddenly rose in my chest, subtle, fleeting. It was also at that moment that I vaguely realized there were already strands of white mixed into her once fully dark hair. I stepped forward, took her hand, and told her not to be angry. I would take her out for a big meal. I said, Auntie, what he said wasn't right. It's not that you had good judgment in choosing me, it's that I'm lucky to have met you. Lucky to have found her among all these ordinary, indifferent people, someone willing to shield me from the wind and rain without complaint. Under the light, my aunt's eyes gradually reddened. She couldn't help but turn away to wipe her tears. After a long moment, she turned back and gave me a smile. What nonsense are you saying? She said, I'm your aunt. We're blood-related family. Loving you is only natural. I began working even harder. With my increasingly rational and objective perspective, the company's profits multiplied rapidly. My personal worth rose along with it. The next time I saw Mason was at a business banquet hosted by a partner. He wore a carefully tailored suit and had styled his hair meticulously, but it still couldn't hide the exhaustion on the once spirited face I remembered. Looking closely, I realized his outfit was from last season. It seemed that supporting a whole group of parasites wasn't easy for him. Funding Carly's dance career required money, and my parents' living expenses were no small burden either. If Mason were willing to bow his head to his family, things might have been different, but his parents had always had high standards. Back then, they had already looked down on me, who had built everything from scratch with Mason. Now, they looked down even more on Carly, who only knew how to rely on others. If Mason wanted his family's support, he would have to break up with Carly first. But it was obvious, he truly loved her. So now, he was willing to lower himself, smiling apologetically to small business owners he once looked down upon. Only now, those people he once dismissed didn't seem to think much of him either. One of the businessmen, who had clearly been pestered by Mason, lit up the moment he saw me. He greeted me enthusiastically and quickly walked toward me. Seeing this, Mason was caught in an awkward position, unable to advance or retreat, and could only stand there stiffly. When our eyes met for a brief moment, his gaze shrank back slightly, no longer carrying the confidence it once had. Back when the company had just started, Mason had disdained the social dealings at business dinners. Those ground-level efforts had always been handled by me. Now that both the company and its partnerships had matured, those people naturally recognized me, not him. That was only natural. I didn't know what Mason was feeling regretful about. But the next moment, as if he had made up his mind, he started walking toward me. I turned away and quietly said a few words to the side. My bodyguards immediately stepped forward and stopped him. He couldn't even get within 3 meters of me. In the end, he was politely escorted out of the venue. Chapter 14. After the banquet ended that night, as I was going to get my car, I ran into Mason, who had been waiting nearby all along. I glanced at him standing in front of me. In my mind, I replayed everything between us once more. After confirming that everything had already been clearly settled, no ambiguity, no loose ends, I turned without hesitation and moved to get into my car. Mason hurriedly reached out to stop me. The car door slammed onto his hand, producing a sharp crack of breaking bones. His face turned instantly pale. Clutching his injured hand, he still kept his gaze fixed stubbornly in my direction. Do we really have to come to this, Wendy? His voice was hoarse from the pain. I rolled down the window, tossed out a check for $100,000, and gave him a faint smile. Medical expenses. Without waiting to see if he would take it, I released it and stepped on the gas, driving off immediately. From the moment I saw Mason, I had already been on guard. That group was falling apart internally, and they had started setting their sights on me again. Sure enough, just 2 days later, I saw Carly at the entrance of my company, someone I hadn't seen in quite a while. If I remembered correctly, she should have been participating in an important competition at the city theater. The organizing committee had even sent me an invitation to attend, and Carly's name was on the participant list. But now, she wasn't even wearing her dance costume. Her face was deliberately made up to look haggard. It was obvious she had come specifically for me. The moment she saw me, Carly switched to her pitiful, miserable expression. Without a word, she rushed forward and dropped to her knees. Sister, I'm begging you, please let Mason go. He's your brother-in-law now. How can you ruin him like this just because of your personal feelings? She cried dramatically, her performance almost theatrical. I looked up, and as expected, among the gathering crowd, I spotted several professional cameras already recording. So this was her plan. I pulled her hand off my arm and said coldly, Carly, be clear about what you're saying. You were the one who stole your sister's fiancé first. Then you couldn't even keep him in check and let him stalk and harass me. I acted in self-defense, and I've already paid for his medical expenses. What else are you dissatisfied with? My voice was steady, just loud enough for everyone around to hear clearly. Carly's face turned pale, and her eyes filled with venom as she looked at me. The murmurs around us grew louder. I knew she must have more tricks up her sleeve. Sure enough, after another round of exaggerated sobbing from Carly, 2 familiar figures appeared before me. If I were still capable of feeling emotions, I might have laughed out loud at this moment. I had to admit, their bond was truly strong. Even after such an ugly fallout last time, they had still managed to reconcile with Carly. But unfortunately, I no longer had emotions. So before my parents could even speak, hesitation flickering in their eyes, I raised a hand to stop them. At the same time, I signaled my secretary to start recording. Several cameras were now pointed directly at them. I spoke calmly and slowly. From this moment on, every word you say will be recorded as evidence. I will pursue its legal effect afterward. Even if a single sentence constitutes defamation, I will file a lawsuit and see it through to the end. My father's face turned ashen instantly. My mother's lips trembled as she tried several times to speak, but no words came out. I had no patience to wait for her to gather herself. I turned to leave, only for her to suddenly rush forward, grabbing my leg as she broke down in tears. Child, what's wrong with you? I'm your mother. You didn't treat me like this before. She cried loudly, recounting how hard it had been to raise me all these years. She said that taking in a comrade's daughter had already been a heavy burden on them, and that they had lived difficult lives all this time. She said I used to be such a sensible daughter, always understanding, always accommodating. How had everything changed just because of one illness and their absence? Wendy, your mother truly regrets it. Every day you ignore me, I suffer. Chapter 15. That face, which had always looked down on me with superiority, was now filled with age and fragility. She tilted her head up, and this time, her crying carried a trace more sincerity than before. Seeing that I remained unmoved, She tightened her grip on me even more. Are you really going to treat your mother like this? Do you not want your mother anymore? I looked down at those tear-filled eyes. Yet not a single ripple stirred within me. Just as I was considering how to respond in a way that wouldn't negatively affect the company's image, a strong pair of hands suddenly pulled her away from my leg. I looked up and saw my aunt, her eyes nearly red with anger. "Get lost!" She shouted loudly at my parents and Carly. Like a lioness protecting her cub, she said, "I have evidence of everything you've done in the past. Don't force me to make it all public." She said, "Wendy has suffered so much to get where she is today. Her life has only just started to improve, and you're already here to pressure her again. Are you really her parents? That's enough. Since when is it your place to interfere in my family matters?" My father's voice barked from not far away. Hearing this, my aunt suddenly let out a bitter laugh. She pointed at Carly, who had remained silent all this time, and addressed the surrounding crowd. "Everyone, this is my brother's adopted daughter, the one for whom he abandoned his biological daughter." At being singled out, Carly flinched, as if realizing something. She rushed toward my aunt in panic, trying to stop her from speaking, but it was too late. Turning back, my aunt raised her voice toward my mother, who was still sitting on the ground. My brother never had any deceased comrade. The girl he adopted is the daughter he had from an affair with his first love after marriage. The words fell like a thunderbolt. My mother, whose eyes had already gone vacant, suddenly scrambled up from the ground. She looked at my father with shock and fury, though she still didn't fully dare to believe it. It wasn't until Carly, unable to withstand the pressure, turned and tried to slip into the crowd behind her, that my mother suddenly snapped to her senses. She rushed forward, grabbed Carly, and scrutinized her features carefully. Then, without hesitation, she slapped her hard across the face. Carly let out a pained scream. The slap was vicious. Ever since Carly had come into the family at 6 years old, she had been treated like a precious jewel, doted on endlessly by my parents. She had never been treated like this before. Tears instantly filled her usually innocent eyes. But the more she looked like that, the more it enraged my mother. "You wretch! You wretch! I treated you like my own daughter, and this is how you repay me?" My mother grabbed whatever she could get her hands on and struck Carly again and again. Carly stumbled and dodged desperately, casting pleading looks toward my father. The surrounding crowd watched the spectacle unfold. No one had expected that the family who came to confront me would end up turning on each other first. The paparazzi Carly had brought to secretly film everything had already been escorted away by my personal bodyguards. As my aunt shielded me and led me away, things over there had escalated to the point where my father, trying to protect Carly, took a slap from my mother, then pinned her to the ground and started hitting her. Chapter 16. As things escalated further, the security personnel quickly stepped in to clear the area. That entire family ended up at the police station once again. But this time, I brought along the paparazzi Carly had hired, along with the pre-written articles they had prepared to smear me. Provoking trouble and fabricating rumors, Carly couldn't escape any of those charges. In the end, it was Mason, still with one hand in a bandage, who rushed over from home to pick them up. The commotion at my company entrance had already made it onto local trending searches. Mason had likely learned what happened on his way there, but when he actually saw Carly in such a disheveled state at the police station, disbelief still filled his face. "Carly, weren't you supposed to be at the competition?" His gaze fell on her, and when he noticed that even the clothes under her coat were not the performance outfit she had supposedly not had time to change out of, he grew even more silent. Back then, Mason had loved her for her image as someone devoted purely to art. He supported Carly's dancing as if making up for the part of himself that had once been too restrained to boldly pursue his own dreams. He had even lowered his pride, throwing himself into the mundane grind of daily life for her. But now, that image was on the verge of collapse. For the sake of coming to my company to smear me, Carly had easily given up a competition she once claimed was more important than her life. People are like that. Sometimes they can be consumed by passion and disregard everything. But disillusionment can come just as quickly. Under Mason's questioning gaze, Carly clearly panicked. Tears streamed down her face as she hurried to explain. "Mason, it's not like that. It's my sister. She tampered with my competition behind the scenes. I had no choice but to do this. I just wanted to beg her to let me go." This had been Carly's plan from the very beginning. She came to my company with my biological parents, intending to throw dirt at me, painting me as a malicious sister driven by jealousy, framing me as someone who sabotaged her adopted sister. Then, using that narrative, she would accuse me of manipulating the competition so that even if she participated, she would never receive the results she deserved. Although she gave up the competition for this, she could ride the wave of attention to boost her fame, making it a win-win move for herself. It was a risky gamble, but relying on the support of my family, Carly had acted recklessly. She thought she could pin me down under public opinion, but she never expected that my aunt would uncover the truth, that she was the product of my father's affair with his first love after marriage. One wrong move, and her entire plan collapsed. Even now, she was still trying to shift the blame onto me, but before Mason arrived, my assistant had already laid out the entire sequence of events for him. This included Carly's transaction records with the paparazzi, as well as the defamatory content they had prepared in advance. Some of those accusations hadn't even happened yet they were written with complete confidence. Meanwhile, the competition's organizing committee had already issued a statement. Having built their reputation over decades, they were outraged that Carly not only skipped the competition but also attempted to smear them. Several senior members of the committee even had connections with Mason's parents. No matter how much Mason might have wanted to cover things up, they had already learned of Carly's existence. Mason's plan to gradually elevate Carly's reputation before bringing her home had completely fallen apart. I didn't know what mindset he had when he came to see Carly, but the moment she lied to him upon meeting, she sealed her own fate in his eyes. The illusion around Carly shattered, and Mason's gaze toward her turned completely cold. He didn't even say a word, he simply turned and walked away, leaving behind a stunned Carly, watching her last hope slip away bit by bit. Without Mason to cover her losses, Carly was sentenced to 15 days of detention. During that time, the dance competition committee filed a lawsuit against her. Combined with some maneuvering by Mason's parents, those 15 days were extended to 2 full months. Alongside her, my parents were also detained. After a lifetime of maintaining a polished image, they ended up being taken into custody twice in their later years. And with the scandal of my father's marital infidelity exposed, all the praise he once received for adopting Carly turned into ridicule and scorn. Chapter 17. Before leaving, he asked me one last time whether I truly wanted things to end up like this between us. I turned back and told him, word by word, with absolute seriousness, I wasn't making a scene. I had simply been swept along for so many years, and now I wanted to break free from the undercurrent that had carried me all this time. I just wanted to live my own life well. No longer held hostage by so-called family ties. No longer placing expectations on people who didn't deserve them. No longer sacrificing myself in exchange for a sliver of their approval. Do you understand? I stopped loving you a long time ago. This is the last time I'll call you that. From now on, let's each go our own way. Dad, Mom. When the final words fell, I couldn't tell what expression was on my father's face. I turned and walked away. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother already in tears. As she watched me leave, she opened her mouth in panic, but in the end, no words came out. Perhaps now, she truly regretted it. After a lifetime of effort, she had personally pushed her own daughter away, only to end up benefiting someone else. But what did any of that have to do with me? In the first 20 years of my life, I had already shed more than enough tears for them. When I stepped out of the police station, my aunt was waiting for me at the entrance. She was one of the few people in this world who truly understood my father. She worried that, now that I had humiliated him like this, he might do something harmful to me in retaliation. And Carly, she's not someone who'll just settle down, my aunt said, the concern in her eyes deepening. I gently placed my hand over hers and told her that we were no longer as vulnerable as before, whatever came. We would handle it. Only then did she relax slightly. After that, I had people keep an eye on Carly's family. I learned that Mason and Carly had broken up. Carly refused to accept it several times. She even caused trouble in front of Mason's parents and was dealt with harshly because of it. My parents had poured everything they had into building her up over the years. Yet in just a short time, Carly was completely blacklisted from the domestic dance world, vanishing without a trace. Having lost her support, Carly chose to bow her head to my father and clung desperately to my parents. But every time my mother saw Carly, she was filled with resentment. She wanted a divorce. But my father refused, so she vented her anger by constantly hitting and scolding Carly. During all this, my business continued to expand, even beginning to move into overseas markets. Mason's parents, who had once looked down on me, now took the initiative to send me invitations. Mason himself tried to contact me several times, but I ignored every single attempt. Later, at another banquet, Mason and I crossed paths again. He seemed much more composed than before, but the way he looked at me was filled with regret. "Wendy, you've become so accomplished. I can barely recognize you anymore," he said, greeting me awkwardly, his eyes unsure where to rest. A man who had carried confidence for half his life now couldn't even stand straight in front of me. He hadn't changed that much. And yet, the pride he once had was gone, perhaps afraid I would drive him away. Mason began speaking rapidly, almost to himself. He said he had always owed me an apology in person. He said that after all this time, he had finally realized he had never truly loved Carly. He had only projected his own desires onto her, believing that through her, he could find his true self. Only now do I realize how naive I was. It was only after losing you that I understood what I had truly lost. I had little patience for his words. In the end, I couldn't bear it anymore and stood up to leave. "Wendy!" Mason called out loudly from behind me. "Can we start over?" "No, I'm not interested in spoiled goods," I replied with a smile, rejecting him without hesitation. "Mason, no matter how nicely you put it, it doesn't change the fact that you cheated during our relationship because you couldn't resist novelty. And now you still have the nerve to show up in front of me. You really have no shame." Only after removing the filter I once had for Mason did I realize that the man I had once placed on a pedestal wasn't anything special. And now, I had long surpassed the place he once stood. From this moment on, the one who would illuminate my life would be me. Chapter 18. Perhaps the blow he received from me was too great. Not long after, I heard that Mason and Carly had gotten involved with each other again. Sure enough, cheating only comes in 2 counts, 0 times or countless times. But this time, Carly no longer enjoyed the treatment of being cherished like before. Mason showed her his worst side without restraint. He often beat her, and not only that, he constantly belittled her with words, calling her a vile woman unlike any other. He looked down on Carly, yet still sought dignity and satisfaction from her. While they were entangled with each other, my parents unexpectedly reconciled. I heard it was because my mother had gotten pregnant again. Having a child late in life completely erased her thoughts of divorce. She even accepted Carly once more. One stormy night, with thunder and lightning crashing outside, an urgent call from an unfamiliar number came through to my phone. When I answered, it was my father's panicked voice. "Wendy, your mother fell at home. She's bleeding a lot. We really don't know what to do. I'm begging you, come and take a look at her. After all, she raised you for more than 20 years. After hanging up, I calmly called emergency services and arranged an ambulance for them. My aunt looked at me worriedly. Several times, she stood up, asking if I wanted her to go out with me. "No need. I'm not a doctor. I wouldn't be able to help anyway," I replied calmly. She looked at me for a long moment before softly agreeing. "That's true, the weather is bad outside. It would be dangerous to go." Hearing her words, a trace of confusion surfaced in my mind. Late at night, after finishing my work and preparing to rest, my phone vibrated. When I answered, there was only a burst of static. I hung up immediately. Only after exiting the call screen did I notice that the number had sent me several messages. The most recent one read, "I'm sorry. Someone like me truly doesn't deserve to be your mother. You and your aunt should live well. Wendy, I'm going to atone for my sins." Scrolling up, there were only a few words. "Don't come." My heart suddenly jolted, a long-lost sense of unease stirring faintly in my chest. I pushed back my chair and stood up, about to head for the door. But when my eyes fell on the storm outside, lightning flashing, rain pouring, I slowed down. In the end, I took out my phone and called the police station responsible for my parents' district. The next morning, the police contacted me immediately. They told me that the old residential building where my parents lived had caught fire the previous night. Carly, my parents, and Mason, all 4 of them had died in the blaze. After investigation, they suspected arson, because toxicology reports found excessive amounts of sleeping pills in all 4 of their bodies. For a moment, I couldn't quite describe what I felt. The brief flicker of emotion I had when reading the message the night before had already vanished, leaving only calm behind. My aunt, however, had tears in her eyes as she looked at me. She pulled me into her arms and gently comforted me, telling me that I would still have her as family in the future. I lowered my gaze and said nothing. Much later, when the police investigation results came out, I finally learned what had really happened that night. It turned out my mother had never been pregnant at all. She had wanted a divorce, but my father found it humiliating, so he had tied her up at home. During that time, Carly's life had been miserable, with Mason's parents pulling strings behind the scenes. She was socially disgraced at university, blacklisted in the dance world, and reduced to staying at home all day, taking out her frustrations on my mother. Of course, the person she hated most was still me. She believed everything she was suffering now was because of me, combined with Mason's hot and cold attitude and his constant comparisons using me to belittle her. Carly finally made up her mind. She and my father devised a vicious plan. They intended to lure me over using my mother as bait, then stage an accident to kill me and divide my current assets. When my mother found out about this plan, she actually volunteered to help. In my father's eyes, my mother hated me just as much, so he didn't guard against her at all. Chapter 19. So on that stormy night, my mother mixed sleeping pills into the food for my father and Carly, and then called Mason over. Although Mason looked down on Carly, he still maintained a certain level of respect toward my mother. When he arrived, he too was drugged. My mother arranged the three of them neatly together, then turned on the gas stove. Additionally, we obtained MS. Song suicide note from your relatives. The police handed me a letter. When I opened it, the paper showed traces of having been soaked with tears. Wendy, if there is a next life and we are fortunate enough to meet again, I will be a good mother. In this life, I will go first to atone for my sins. I thought, if there truly is a next life, it would be better if we never became entangled again. After that, my aunt and I lived well. On the first snowy day of the year, I made dumplings at my aunt's house. She had decorated the home in warm, cozy tones. As the first snowflake fell, she called me over to eat. When I turned around, I saw her kind profile, and a familiar warmth slowly rose from the frozen depths of my chest. So I smiled at her. For the first time in so long, it was a smile filled with genuine emotion. Seeing this, my aunt froze in place, holding the plate. Gradually, her eyes reddened. We looked at each other and smiled. At last, after weathering countless storms, the road ahead held nothing but spring warmth and blooming flowers.